Elena left the cafe with the weight of the envelope pressed against her heart, the echo of the message ringing in her mind. The city's noise had not diminished. If anything, it seemed to grow more insistent. Taxis splashing through puddles, distant sirens winding through the streets, a couple arguing in a language she didn't know as they hurried past. Yet all of it seemed to slide off her, as though she moved beneath the surface of a pond, hearing the world only in muffled waves. She walked home beneath the gray sky, the invitation burning a hole in her bag. The closer she came to her apartment, the more restless she felt. By the time she closed her door behind her, she was pacing the small living room, the card held tightly in her fist. She tried to focus on the ordinary things, her damp coat hung up to dry, the kettle hissing on the stove, the streetlights flickering on one by one outside her window. But the emptiness inside her had changed. It wasn't a hollow ache now, but a space alive with possibility and fear. "You are ready." She ran her thumb over the wax seal, now cracked and broken. She thought of every time she'd felt invisible in a crowd, every moment she'd looked in the mirror and wondered who was staring back. The salon of silent mirrors. The words were strange, almost dreamlike, but they tugged at her curiosity. She glanced at her phone. Dusk would fall soon. She moved through her evening like a sleepwalker. She showered, dried her hair, and dressed in simple black. She put on boots, a coat, and a scarf, then slipped the invitation into her pocket. She hesitated at the door, her hand trembling on the knob. She could ignore this, throw away the card, and let the strangeness fade into memory. But she couldn't. Something in her demanded to know what waited at 13 Vesper Lane. The city was different at dusk. Streetlights painted the wet pavement gold, and the air was thick with the scent of rain and distant lilacs from a florist's cart. Elena walked with purpose, her heart pounding. She'd never heard of Vesper Lane despite living in the city for years. She found it tucked between two narrow streets, a cobblestone alley so small she might have missed it if not for the number 13 painted in faded silver on an old wooden door. She paused, listening. The city's noise seemed to hush around her, as if the alley existed in its own silence. She raised her hand and, after a moment's hesitation, knocked. The door swung open at her touch. Inside, the hallway was dim, lit by sconces that cast a warm, golden glow. The walls were lined with mirrors, some small and ornate, others large and plain. She caught glimpses of herself in the glass, a dozen shifting Elenas, all watching with wide, uncertain eyes. She followed the corridor deeper, her footsteps muffled on the thick carpet. At the end, a heavy velvet curtain hung across a doorway. She drew it aside and stepped through. The room beyond was hushed, almost reverent. Around the walls stood tall mirrors in gilded frames, their surfaces so clear she felt they might swallow her whole. In the center of the room, a few people stood or sat quietly, their faces calm, their eyes distant and thoughtful. No one spoke. A woman approached, older, with hair silver as moonlight, and a presence both gentle and commanding. She smiled, and in her eyes, Elena saw kindness and a flicker of understanding. "Welcome," the woman said softly. "You've come because you're ready to see." Elena nodded, uncertain what she meant, but unwilling to deny it. The woman gestured to the nearest mirror. "Here. We look beyond the surface. Take your time. When you're ready, look. Really look." Elena moved to the mirror, her reflection swimming into view. She expected to see herself as usual. Tired eyes, neat hair, the familiar mask she wore for the world. But as she gazed, the image shifted. She saw herself as a child, wild and laughing, hair tangled and cheeks flushed with mischief. She saw the teenager who'd hidden behind books, the young woman who'd tried so hard to please everyone but herself. The woman she had become, carrying her beauty like armor, hiding her loneliness behind a practiced smile. Tears stung her eyes. She reached out, her fingertips nearly touching the glass. The mirror did not distort or flatter. It simply reflected all the selves she had ever been, all the selves she might yet become. She stepped back, breathless. Around her, others moved from mirror to mirror, each caught in their own silent revelations. The room was filled with a quiet that was not emptiness but possibility. The silence was full. The silver-haired woman came to stand beside her. Most people see only what they expect, she murmured. But here, you can see more. You can see the truth of who you are. Elena looked into the mirror again. This time, she saw herself as she was now. Her hair, her tired eyes, her uncertain smile. But she also saw strength, resilience, moments of joy and courage she'd never given herself credit for. She saw the weight she carried and the ways she had survived. For a long time, she stood there, letting the images wash over her. The emptiness inside her began to change. It was not a void to be filled, but a space for something new. She realized she had been waiting, not for someone else to see her, but to see herself. When she left the salon, the city's noise greeted her like an old friend. The cars still honked, footsteps still hurried, voices still tangled in the night air. But Elena moved through it all with a new stillness inside her, a quiet that was not loneliness, but peace. She touched her hair, feeling its familiar weight, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like her own. She walked home beneath the city lights, the invitation tucked away, her heart lighter. The world was unchanged, but she was not. Elena hesitated, her heart beating a strange, syncopated rhythm that vibrated in her chest. The woman's hand, long-fingered and strong, beckoned with a gentle certainty. Without quite understanding why, Elena's feet obeyed before her mind had finished weighing the moment. She crossed the threshold deeper into the salon, the door sighing quietly shut behind her, sealing away the outside world. The room's warmth intensified as they passed through the main hall. The air was fragrant, thick with lavender, and that sharper note, clove perhaps, or something more ancient. The mirrors along the walls watched her, their delayed reflections like echoes in a dream. Elena caught glimpses of herself, her hair, her uncertainty, her curiosity, always a fraction of a second behind, as if her reflection needed to decide if it wished to follow her at all. They moved past other women, each in their own quiet sphere of transformation. In one corner, an attendant draped a velvet cloak around a client's shoulders, their eyes meeting in a silent, reverent exchange. Another woman sat before a mirror, her hands trembling slightly as a stylist traced a delicate henna pattern along her scalp, the lines glistening gold and copper beneath the light. There was no idle chatter here, no nervous laughter or sharp notes of gossip, only the hush of ritual and the soft, occasional hum that seemed to pulse from the walls themselves. Elena's guide led her toward a private alcove. Heavy curtains, midnight blue, Miu parted at a touch to reveal a smaller room bathed in golden light. A single chair stood at the center, upholstered in deep plum velvet, its arms wide and welcoming. The woman gestured for Elena to sit. With a deep breath, Elena lowered herself into the chair. The seat cradled her, surprisingly soft, as though it remembered the contours of everyone who had ever sat there. Her guide knelt beside her, eyes luminous. "You have questions," the woman said. It was not a question, it was a certainty. Elena nodded, her voice a whisper. "What is this place? Why am I here?" The woman smiled, the crescent ring catching the light. Vesper Lane is a threshold. Some seek it out, some are summoned. All who enter are searching for something. Renewal, release, revelation. The card found you. That means you are ready to let go of what no longer serves you. Elena's hand drifted to her hair, as if to shield it. She had always hidden behind it, the tumble of curls, the shield of bangs. It had been armor, a mask, a comfort. And yet, as she looked around, she saw only grace in the women who had shed that shield. Beauty, not in adornment, but in bareness. The woman reached out, not to touch, but to offer. Transformation can be frightening, but it is also freedom. Here, we honor the shedding of what is no longer needed. Here, you choose what to leave behind. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the quiet hum, the low rhythm that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. She remembered the weeks and months of feeling restless, out of place in her own skin, as if her reflection had been a costume she could no longer bear. She remembered the card, slipping out from between the pages of a book she'd almost forgotten. An invitation, a summons, a promise. When she opened her eyes again, she found the woman waiting, patient and unhurried. "Will it hurt?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible. "Only as much as you need it to," the woman replied. "And when it is done, you may find that the pain is only the sound of old walls crumbling." With trembling fingers, Elena released her grip on her hair. The woman rose, moving with a dancer's grace to a nearby table where a silver basin and a set of gleaming razors rested. She returned, kneeling once more, her movements reverent. "May I? She asked, waiting for Elena's nod. Elena's consent was a breath, a surrender. The razor was warm in the woman's hands, gentle as it touched her scalp. The first lock fell, then another, each one lighter than she expected. With every pass, Elena felt the past slip away. Old hurts, outdated dreams, the weight of other people's expectations. The hum in the room grew, a low, thrilling vibration that seemed to rise from the floor, from the mirrors, from inside her own chest. As the last strand drifted to the floor, Elena's head felt impossibly light. The woman set the razor aside and pressed a cool cloth to her scalp, scented with more lavender, more mystery. The sensation was electric, alive. Elena opened her. Elena's heart hammered in her chest as the clipper's steady buzz filled the space around her. The sound was hypnotic, relentless, a promise and a threat. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sensation wash over her. In the mirror before her, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection, wide-eyed, tense, her hair falling in a dark, tangled curtain past her shoulders. It was hair she had grown for years, hair she had braided and unbraided, washed and dried, hidden and flaunted in turn. It had been a shield and a story, an identity she carried without question. Now it felt heavy as stone. The stylist's hands were gentle and sure. She combed through Elena's hair with practiced ease, separating it into sections, lifting it away from the scalp, as though measuring its weight and meaning. Around them, the salon thrummed with quiet energy, women speaking in low voices, laughter bubbling up now and then, the muted snip of scissors, the steady hum of clippers. It was a world unto itself, vibrant and alive, a sanctuary of transformation. "Breathe," the stylist murmured, her voice soft as velvet. Elena drew in a shaky breath, the cape pressing in at her throat and shoulders. It was strange, this vulnerability, this surrender. She didn't know if she was ready, but she had come this far. She remembered the women she had seen, the one whose shock melted into awe as her curls fell away, the one who laughed until she cried as her silver hair rained down around her. They had not looked broken. They had looked somehow more themselves. The first touch of the clippers on her skin was electric, a buzzing warmth that started at the nape of her neck. The stylist guided the machine gently upward, and Elena felt the vibration resonate through her bones. She heard, rather than saw, the first heavy locks tumble away, the soft thud as they hit the floor. There was no going back now. A sudden lightness bloomed at the base of her skull. The sensation was unfamiliar, strange, exhilarating, terrifying. The stylist worked slowly, methodically, each pass of the clippers stripping away a layer of her old self. The hair that had framed her face, shielded her from the world, now drifted down in dark waves. Elena felt exposed, raw, but also curiously alive. The women around her watched with quiet understanding, some offering encouraging smiles, others simply witnessing. There was no judgment in their eyes, only a deep, shared knowing. In this room, transformation was not an act of loss, but of becoming. The stylist paused, letting the clippers rest for a moment. She ran her hand lightly over Elena's scalp, checking for stray strands. "You're doing beautifully," she said. "The hardest part is letting go." Elena blinked back tears she hadn't realized were gathering in her eyes. She remembered the times she had hidden behind her hair, the weight of expectation and convention pressing down on her. She remembered wishing sometimes that she could just start over. Now, as the last of her hair fell away, she felt the first stirrings of freedom. The clippers moved around her ears, tracing the curve of her skull. Each stroke revealed more of her, the shape of her head, the line of her jaw, the delicate shell of her ears. She felt naked, but not ashamed. The air on her skin was cool and bracing, a reminder that she was still here, still whole. When the stylist finally switched off the clippers, the sudden silence was profound. Elena sat very still, her heart thudding in the quiet. She felt the stylist's fingers brush away the loose hairs clinging to her scalp, felt the cape loosen and fall away from her shoulders. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure if she wanted to see herself. But then she looked up, meeting her own gaze in the mirror. The woman who stared back at her was both familiar and foreign. Her face was unadorned, unhidden, striking in its honesty. The absence of hair drew attention to her eyes, wide and luminous, to the strong lines of her cheekbones, to the curve of her mouth. There was a vulnerability there, but also a quiet power. Elena raised a tentative hand to her scalp, tracing the new contours with her fingertips. The sensation was startling, a soft stubble, warm and alive. She smiled, tentative at first, then wider, the corners of her eyes crinkling. It wasn't just the change in her appearance, it was the sense of release, of having shed something she no longer needed. Around her, the other women smiled in recognition. The young woman with the black curls, now gone, caught her eye and nodded, her own face transformed by acceptance. The older woman with the silver hair beamed, her eyes shining with the same joy Elena had seen before. The tall, bald woman, who had first guided Elena to the chair, stepped forward, her presence calm and steady. "You see?" she said. "There's nothing to fear." Elena nodded, a laugh bubbling up in her chest, light, unburdened. She felt the weight she had carried for so long slipping away, replaced by a sense of possibility. She was not less than she had been, she was more herself than ever before. The stylist offered her a warm towel, pressing it gently to her scalp, soothing the tingling skin. It was an act of care, a small kindness in the midst of transformation. Elena closed her eyes, savoring the moment, letting herself be held. When she stood at last, cape gone, hair gone, she felt taller somehow, more grounded in her own skin. The salon was still alive with voices and laughter, but now Elena felt herself a part of it, connected by the shared experience of letting go and beginning again. She walked to the door, her steps light, her heart open. Outside, the world waited, unfamiliar perhaps, but no longer daunting. She was free, and for the first time in a long while, she was ready to meet herself anew. The room felt impossibly quiet, as if the world itself had paused to witness her transformation. Elena sat rigid, her hands trembling in her lap. The clipper's mechanical whir still echoed in her memory, even though the sound had faded. She stared at her own reflection, unsure whether to weep or to smile. The woman in the mirror looked familiar, yet wholly strange. The eyes, her eyes, were still the same, but now they blazed with a new clarity, unshadowed by the auburn curtain that had always defined her. She lifted her hand tentatively, almost frightened to touch what was left behind. Her fingertips brushed over the soft stubble, the sensation electric and raw. It was as if she were feeling her own scalp for the first time, discovering the true shape of her head, the gentle slope at the crown, the subtle ridge above her temple. Her breath caught, and for a moment she simply sat, suspended between grief and exhilaration. Memories flickered in her mind like shards of glass. She remembered being a little girl, sitting cross-legged on the floor as her mother wove careful braids, humming old lullabies. She remembered the pride in her mother's eyes, the praise from teachers and friends, the way her hair had always been her armor and her adornment. She remembered how, as a teenager, she'd learned to wield a curling iron, how she'd experimented with dyes and cuts, trying on new selves each season, each heartbreak, each hope. But she also remembered the way her hair had sometimes felt like a burden, how it had marked her as feminine when she wished to be invisible, how it had drawn attention she hadn't always wanted. She remembered interviews where compliments about her appearance outweighed questions about her skills. She remembered lovers who had run their fingers through her hair, as if it were a tether binding her to their expectations. Now, as she watched the last of her locks being gathered by the attendants, bald themselves, their expressions serene and respectful, Elena felt a strange lightness. They moved with ritualistic grace, cradling the fallen hair as if it were some precious offering. Their whispers hung in the air. Release! Renewal! The words seemed to settle on her bare scalp, comforting and profound. She wanted to ask them what would happen next. She wanted to ask whether she would ever feel whole, or whether she was meant to feel this raw and exposed forever. But something inside her resisted the urge to seek reassurance. Instead, she found herself breathing deeply, slowly, letting the unfamiliar coolness wash over her. The woman who had wielded the clippers stood behind her now, silent and watchful. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a quiet understanding. Elena realized that this woman had seen countless others pass through this moment, each one shedding their past like an old skin. She wondered how many stories lay hidden in the piles of hair swept from these floors, how many fears, how many hopes, how many secret shames and silent joys. Elena closed her eyes, allowing the sensations to flood her. The ache in her chest was mingled with something fierce and bright, a sense of possibility. She no longer needed to hide behind her hair, to conform to the versions of herself that others had constructed. She was stripped down to her essence, vulnerable but unmistakably herself. She opened her eyes again, and her reflection met her gaze. A woman transformed, not by the loss of hair, but by the willingness to let go. She saw the delicate curve of her skull, the sharpness of her cheekbones, the strength in her jaw. She saw the tears glistening on her lashes, the faint flush on her cheeks. She saw, beneath it all, a courage she had never known she possessed. For the first time in years, she smiled at her own reflection. The smile was tentative at first, shy and uncertain, but it grew as she allowed herself to see beyond the shock. She imagined the days ahead, how she would walk through the streets with her head uncovered, how strangers might stare, how friends and family might react. She thought about the discomfort, the curiosity, the questions she would face, but she also thought about the freedom, the honesty, the relief of no longer having to hide. The attendants finished collecting her hair, and one approached her with a soft cloth. Gently, reverently, she wiped away the stray hairs clinging to Elena's neck and shoulders. The gesture was intimate, almost motherly, and Elena felt a fresh wave of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. The attendant smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You are welcome. This is your beginning." Elena nodded, unsure what to say. She felt the truth of those words settling into her bones. This was not an ending, but a new chapter, a chance to redefine herself on her own terms. She stood, legs unsteady, and took one last look in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was both familiar and strange, soft and fierce, broken and whole. She was no longer hidden, no longer adorned. She was simply Elena. As she walked from the room, she ran her fingers once more over the downy stubble on her scalp. The sensation was still foreign, but it was hers. She savored the cool air, the weightlessness, the sense of being unburdened. Outside, the world awaited her. Loud, bright, unpredictable. She did not know what challenges or joys the future would bring, but she knew, in that moment, that she had chosen herself. She had released what no longer served her and stepped into the unknown, renewed. With each step, she felt the ground more firmly beneath her feet. No longer masked, no longer defined by others' expectations, she moved through the world as her truest self. And that, she realized, was the greatest revelation of all. There is a unique intimacy in the simple act of touch, the kind that bridges the distance between strangers, transforming the ordinary into something memorable. For Elena, the experience unfolded with a quiet intensity in the softly lit salon, where time seemed to slow, every sensation amplified. The whir of the clippers had faded, leaving behind a charged silence. The stylist's hands, warm and assured, pressed a steaming towel against Elena's scalp. The heat was immediate, soaking into her skin, relaxing the muscles at the base of her neck, melting away the last remnants of tension. It was a gentle, enveloping warmth that seemed to cradle her whole being, inviting her to surrender to the moment. With her eyes closed, Elena let her other senses heighten. The fragrant steam curled around her, carrying notes of lavender and cedar, woodsy and calming. Each breath she drew in seemed to root her more firmly in the present, the boundaries between her body and the world shifting, blurring, as the towel softened her scalp in preparation for what was to come. She felt vulnerable, yes, but also cared for. as if the ritual itself was a form of silent communication, one that spoke of trust and acceptance. When the towel was lifted away, a refreshing coolness lingered, making Elena shiver despite the warmth of the room. Then came the foam, dispensed expertly into the stylist's hands. It was warm, richer than she expected, and scented with something clean and just slightly sweet. The foam was spread over her scalp, and the stylist's fingers began their work, moving in slow, deliberate circles. Each touch traced the curvature of her skull, exploring every rise and hollow. The sensation was at once soothing and electrifying, a paradox she could not quite untangle. Elena felt her breath catch as the fingers pressed more deeply, kneading away tension she hadn't known she held. The firm, rhythmic motions carried a sense of purpose, as if the stylist was not merely preparing her for a haircut, but for a transformation. Every nerve seemed to come alive under the careful ministrations, sending tiny sparks dancing down her spine. She shivered again, unsure if it was comfort, anticipation, or something altogether more primal that stirred within her. As the foam was rinsed away, the stylist reached for the straight razor. Under the chandelier's glow, the blade caught the light, gleaming with promise. The stylist met Elena's gaze in the mirror, offering a wordless reassurance. Then, with practiced precision, the razor was drawn across Elena's scalp, its edge whispering against her skin. Each stroke was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. There was an artistry to it, a reverence for the process, as if the removal of hair was not an erasure, but a revelation. Elena felt each pass of the blade acutely. The sensation was unlike anything she had felt before, a gentle scraping, followed by a rush of cool air against newly bare skin. The razor's passage left her exposed, yet paradoxically armored, as if the act of baring herself to the world made her stronger, more herself. She found herself focusing on each sound, the soft rasp of the blade, the stylist's measured breathing, the faint hum of conversation in the background. The world had narrowed to this single, luminous moment. As the stylist worked, another presence approached. A woman, elegant and self-assured, placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. Her touch was feather-light, her fingers tracing a path down Elena's arm with deliberate gentleness. The gesture was intimate, yet respectful, a silent affirmation that Elena was seen, valued. The woman leaned in, her breath warm against Elena's ear. "You are beautiful," she whispered, her words soft but steady, carrying a weight that lingered long after the sound faded. Elena's heart fluttered in her chest, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief swirling within her. The compliment felt like a benediction, a recognition not just of her physical appearance, but of her courage in embracing transformation. She opened her eyes, meeting the gaze of the woman in the mirror. There was no judgment there, only acceptance and admiration, a reflection of Elena's own emerging sense of self. By the time the razor had completed its work, Elena's scalp was utterly smooth, gleaming under the salon's lights. She reached up, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, to touch her head. The skin was impossibly soft, almost luminous, and the sensation of her own fingers tracing the unfamiliar contours was both foreign and exhilarating. She felt raw, as if every mask had been stripped away, leaving her essence exposed to the world. Yet in that exposure, she discovered a new kind of strength, a sense of invincibility that had nothing to do with armor or pretense, and everything to do with authenticity. The stylist stepped back, allowing Elena to take in her reflection fully. For the first time in a long while, she saw herself not as a collection of flaws or insecurities, but as someone whole. The absence of hair revealed the curve of her skull, the elegant line of her neck, the expressive arch of her brow. There was a clarity to her features now, a boldness that had been hidden beneath layers of habit and expectation. She smiled, tentative at first, then with growing assurance. The woman who had spoken earlier caught her eye and smiled back, her approval quiet but unmistakable. In that shared moment, Elena felt a profound connection, not just to those around her, but to herself. She realized that beauty was not a matter of conformity, but of courage, the willingness to embrace change, to honor one's own journey, and to stand unapologetically in the light. As she rose from the chair, the weight she had carried for so long seemed to lift. The room felt brighter, the air fresher, as if the act of transformation had altered more than just her appearance. She walked with her head held high, each step a quiet declaration of self-acceptance. The world outside awaited, full of possibilities, and Elena was ready to meet it. Authentic, unguarded, and invincible, Elena's heart thumped in her chest, echoing the staccato rhythm of her new beginning. Around her, the air hummed with the quiet energy of transformation. The gentle touch of fingertips on her scalp sent shivers down her spine, not from cold, but from the raw vulnerability of exposure. She had never imagined herself like this, her hair, once a curtain and a shield, now gone, replaced with nothing but the unadorned truth of her own skin. The mirrors reflected not just her newly revealed face, but something deeper, a presence, a self that had waited in silence for this moment. As the murmurs of the women circled about her, Elena felt the weight of their attention. It was not the gaze of scrutiny she had feared, but one of shared understanding and celebration. Their eyes held stories, their smiles spoke of journeys both similar and strange. The tall woman with the silver crescent ring stepped forward, her posture regal, her expression kind. The ring caught the light, flashing briefly as she lifted her hand to Elena's cheek, a soft, grounding touch. "You have joined the circle," the woman said, her voice resonant, carrying both authority and warmth. "Here, hair is not a cage, but a choice. You have chosen freedom." The words settled over Elena like a benediction. For so long, her hair had been more than a fashion, more than a habit. It had been a boundary, a comfort, a way to blend in and remain unseen. With each snip of the shears, she had felt the old stories falling away, the expectations and doubts scattering like autumn leaves. Now, with her scalp exposed to the cool air, she felt both naked and strong, vulnerable and invincible. She was both more herself and more a part of something than she had ever been. A woman with a freshly shaved head stood across from her, her eyes luminous with recognition. There was no need for words between them. The connection sparked instantly, a silent acknowledgement of shared courage. The woman's smile was gentle, but her gaze was fierce. In that look, Elena saw both welcome and challenge. The promise that she was no longer alone in her difference, and the invitation to discover what this new self could become. Around them, the salon buzzed with the quiet rituals of affirmation. Some women poured tea, the aromatic steam curling upward, carrying hints of chamomile and sage. Others swept away the fallen hair, treating each strand with respect, as if honoring the shedding of old skins. Soft music played, notes that seemed to wind through the space, threading together the disparate experiences of those gathered. Elena's fingers rose, hesitant at first, to trace the contours of her scalp. The sensation was unfamiliar, electric. She could feel the shape of her own skull, the subtle dips and rises, the delicate pulse of blood beneath the skin. It was as though she were meeting herself for the first time, not the Elena shaped by others' expectations, but the Elena who had always waited beneath the surface, patient and resilient. Memories flickered in her mind. Childhood afternoons spent braiding her hair under her mother's watchful gaze. Teenage years marked by endless hours taming unruly strands into submission. The social gatherings where compliments on her hair felt like both a prize and a trap. Each memory was a thread, now severed. In their place was a new tapestry, one she could weave for herself. The women gathered closer, their voices weaving into a tapestry of stories. One spoke of her own decision to let go of her hair, a gesture of mourning and rebirth after loss. Another described the liberation she found in shedding the expectations of femininity imposed by family and society. Each story was unique, but all shared the same undercurrent: the courage to claim one's own narrative, to wear one's skin and soul openly. Elena listened, her chest swelling with gratitude. The fear that had clenched her heart before, the fear of being seen, of standing out, of being judged, was replaced by an expanding sense of possibility. Here, in this circle, difference was not just tolerated, but cherished. The act of shaving one's head, so often seen as radical or rebellious, was reframed as sacred, a declaration of sovereignty over one's body and story. The woman with the silver crescent ring poured her a cup of tea, the porcelain warm between Elena's hands. She sipped, tasting not just the herbs, but the intention behind them. It was a ritual of welcome, a way to mark this turning point. Elena closed her eyes, letting the warmth spread through her, grounding her in the present. When she opened her eyes again, she caught her own reflection once more. This time, she did not flinch or search for familiar markers. Instead, she met her own gaze head-on, seeing not just the physical changes, but the fierceness and clarity that had always been there, waiting for permission to shine. The women began to sing, their voices blending in a low, harmonious chant. The melody was wordless, yet full of meaning, a song of release, of belonging, of strength. Elena felt the vibrations in her bones, a resonance that lingered long after the last note faded. She stood a little straighter, the uncertainty of before melting away. The freshly shaved woman moved to her side, and together they faced the mirrors, a pair of reflections that spoke of kinship and possibility. In that moment, Elena understood that she had not just lost something, she had gained a new way of being. Her hair was no longer a mask, but a memory. What remained was herself, unadorned and unafraid. The salon doors stood open, and sunlight filtered in, golden and inviting. Elena stepped forward, her feet steady now, ready to meet the world with her new face. The circle of women parted to let her pass, their eyes alight with pride. As she crossed the threshold, Elena carried with her the touch of their hands, the warmth of their voices, and the knowledge that she was not alone. She was part of a lineage, a sisterhood defined not by appearance, but by the courage to choose freedom. The world outside awaited, unfamiliar and full of possibility, and Elena was ready to greet it, every inch of herself shining, powerful, and free.